Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, East Africa's Migration, the greatest show on Earth, presented by nathab expedition leader Richard de Gouveia. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Richard, take it away.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you everyone for joining in. It's been a little moment since I've seen you guys, and really excited to be here and discuss the Great Migration. Again, I just thought to myself, is the greatest show on earth. I've just got back from our KT trip that goes through Kenya and Tanzania, and it just left me with this wow, just to see the sheer number of animals and to be part of the power and see the role that each of these animals play in what is, I think, the greatest show on earth. But the reason why I really wanted to get into this today was to quell a few myths and to explain the migration a little better, because I think so many people associate the migration with what you see on the screen, the crossings. The crossings are but a momentary blip in a yearly route that goes between Kenya and Tanzania. And in this, most people think it is only wildebeest, but it's around 1.5 million wildebeest. Plus, we have about 600,000 zebra that go along with it. And on top of that, we still have topi, we have Grant's gazelle, we have Thompson's gazelle, all making this route because it is seasonally driven. It is driven by seasonal pattern migration. Because rains fall in different areas, the animals are forced to move from place to place in order to find the best grazing that they can. Without that, the ecosystem would fall apart and they would outcompete each other if they stayed in the same place for the food sources. So let's look at the route. Here is a very nice map. It was made up by Africa Geographic, which is a great magazine that is based out of South Africa. And as you can see the areas of the migration, and then it goes in a circular pattern. It goes all the way around. Now there is, how do you say, where does migration start? Where does it end? There is no start to a circle. At some stage, we would probably call the beginning down around February, March, down here where they do their calving. Let's call that the beginning because that is the point where one of the greatest adaptations of the wildebeest to be able to do these migrations is their ability to have all of their babies at the same time, is what we call the synchronization of births. And by synchronizing these births, you have 1.5 million wildebeest, along with a whole load, 500,000 zebra, all dropping their babies within a period of just a few weeks. 6 to 7 weeks, all of these babies drop. And the reason why this is such a powerful, powerful thing is because at that time, you have so many predators trying to take advantage of all the babies. And because it's in such a small amount of time, the predators can only eat so much. They get full. Yes, it's an easy meal. Sometimes it's a bit gruesome. The animals might be pulling babies out of a mother that's giving birth. Sometimes the babies are just outrun. And we'll talk about that predator-prey interaction. But down in the south, it is what we call the green season or the calving season. And because of these different seasons, we have different ways we move. From that point, they start moving around and following the rain. Rain is a very important part of the Serengeti. These big, big open plains were created a few million years ago, about 3 or 4 million years ago, when a massive volcanic eruption hit. It laid a layer of basalt or lava out, which turned into basalt, which is an igneous rock, which is great for supporting grasslands. Lots of grasses, which means lots of herbivores. And depending on the number of your herbivores, you automatically have this predator-prey interaction that will move back and forth. So chasing the rains, these guys start to move up and out of the Maswa Game Reserve, the Ngorongoro Conservation Area here, where they were carving, and start moving up north to the Grumeti, where the first of the crossings happen. Now, the Grumeti River crossings are not often spoken about because it's on a private reserve. It is a private area within the Serengeti, and within these Grumeti rivers, not a lot of people get to see these crossings, but they can be just as spectacular as those that happen on the Mara River. And then from there, they start to migrate even further north and cross over the Mara River here in the Lamai Triangle, in the Mara Triangle, pushing up into the Masai Mara, and then spend September and October up here in the Masai Mara. So you can see that Kenya actually has a very small part of that migration. And that's why everyone's like, oh, I need to go to Kenya to see the migration. You can only see the migration in Kenya in about August, September, and October because of those crossings. Then after that, those wildebeest cross back into Tanzania and start making their way south again, following the rains. And as we were flying south along our trip, because we start all the way in the north of Kenya, further up here with the white rhinos, looking at a place called Old Pajeta, where you have the last two remaining northern white rhinos. It's a great rhino conservation area. We saw good lions. It was beautiful. And then we make our way down to the Masai Mara, to the western edge here, where there is a conservancy called Old Derekesi, and we bump into the Masai Mara for a day, and then we bump out again, and then we come back into Tanzania, and we spend a few nights here to see if we can get some of these crossings. But as you can see, this was a photo taken on another trip where I was in the Grumeti concessions, where we had about 10,000 zebra all accumulating in one area as they were making their way north to try and follow their way in. The wildebeest was still behind, and this is often what happens, is the zebra push a little bit further forward because they graze on the taller grass, and then the wildebeest come in and chomp this more shorter grass at the background. Again, another great image, just showing a load of zebra moving along here. And the Serengeti is just, and the Masai Mara are really known very well for these big open plains, and you have these wonderful sunsets, magical colors, these rainstorms falling, and depending on where you are, we get this incredible feeling. So this roundabout route keeps on going, and each time we get up to this crossing area here, we have thousands and thousands of these animals moving along. Now, what makes the wildebeest so good at this migration and at this ability to move these great distances? We're talking about 1,800 miles around each time they circle. So the big thing is having the muscle composition and the endurance to be able to handle this, because the legs and muscles of migratory wildebeest are optimized for the long distance travel. They've got a high proportion of slow twitch muscles. So predators would have fast twitch muscles for bursts of speed, for this real explosive stuff, where these guys have these slow twitch muscles, which enable them to sustain activity over extended periods without getting too much fatigue. And this also allows them to maintain speeds of up to 50 miles an hour when necessary, just going. Now, where I'm from in South Africa, wildebeest are known as the last animals that God created. Let's be honest, a wildebeest is not the most beautiful creature on the planet. I'm just trying to find one where we have, where we have a picture of a wildebeest. I keep on starting that guy. But these guys are not the prettiest animals in the world, and they are known as the last thing that God made, with all the leftovers. He's got the horns of a buffalo. They have the stripes of a zebra on the side. They have a goatee of a goat. They have the mane of a horse. They have the tail of a donkey. They have the sloping legs of a hyena. and this creates a pogo stick effect. But unfortunately for them, there were no more brains left. They can often appear as quite dim-witted creatures. But when you have numbers of 1.5 million animals making a migration, you cannot be called dim because you've obviously done something right. So that muscle composition is a very important part. The energy storage that they have the ability that when it rains to effectively store energy reserves in the form of fat in their bodies, which not a lot of animals do, especially in the wild, not unless you're in colder climates, because they need to do this for when there are harder times and there's food scarcity. And they may have to move through areas that don't have great feeding in order to get to the next point of feeding. So they need to be able to handle these barren landscapes with limited forage in order to get through that. And the fat reserves accumulated during the wet season serve as this buffer, allowing them to survive through these lean periods until they reach areas of fresh grazing. The other thing is when you're doing crossings like this and in the chaos of changing areas, you need strong hooves and strong legs enabled to be able to take the continuous impact to reduce the risk of injury over the long distances they travel and be able to go through rocky and muddy terrains that all change as they're going along. So this is a very important part of the whole thing. The other thing is water retention and temperature regulation. The wildebeest have evolved very efficient kidneys which are capable of maximizing water retention. Additionally, wildebeest have adapted to regulate their body temperature by reducing activity during the hottest parts of the day and then increasing it during the cooler times. And these help them to ebb and flow with those changing conditions and be able to take the different parts of it and maximize water when it's available and live without it when it's not while they're doing this big journey. The other things that really, really strike home is the swarm intelligence and the herding instinct. So the swarm intelligence is mightily important. If we look at times when they're doing the crossings, the swarm intelligence is what gets them through. And what you have is you have this gathering, and it's quite a thing to watch because what we do is we stay back and away from the main area, the main parts of the river, and you have to wait for them to build up. So as their numbers build up, sometimes just hundreds, you may see smaller crossings of 50 to 100 to 150, and then other times you calculate your crossings in minutes. So one of the crossings that we experience now was about 22 minutes, and it's estimated that for every 5 minutes is 1,500 animals. So in those 22 minutes, we had over 6,000 animals that crossed over at that point. And it's just chaos. But before they get there, you have a lot of, they're all dim-wittedly talking to one another, looking at the water going, oh my God, that is so scary. What are we doing here? We have really put ourselves in a jam. So they sit there and they're back and they're forth and they may run forward and then they go, oh, no, 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 no. And one runs back and then they all run away. And then they start building and building and building and building and building. And all this noise is like a dinner bell for everything else. So crocodiles start to converge at the points and they're waiting to see when the wildebeest will go. But this swarm intelligence is a strong herding instinct. It allows them to form these large groups and provides the safety in numbers, which first off could deter a predator when you have thousands of hooves. And we often see it when the crossings are happening, that they start jumping like this and the crocodiles actually step back and wait because they're looking for somebody that's rather a little bit off kilter, maybe being drifted in the current, rather than getting themselves stuck in a point where there's hooves that could spike eyes, they could do themselves damage if they're too ambitious in getting in there. And being in this densely packed herd, in bigger numbers means that if one is taken, there's 5,999 that aren't. So you have a greater chance if you're in this bigger herd. And this swarm intelligence is where individuals within the herd follow the movements and actions of others, which create coordinated group movement. Think of a swarm of bees, or your murmurations of starlings, things like that, where they swarm around and they all move in the same direction. And what it takes is, this is crucial for the river crossings, because what happens is once they get to this point that one decides to go, it takes a bit of bravery, it takes a bit of stupidity, but the first one jumps. And once the first one goes, everyone goes. And it's just utter chaos. They just queue, and it's just going, 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 going. And you have all of this chaos, everyone jumping. Sometimes they start trying to get in faster, so they jump off of walls that are a bit too high and they can break legs. I mean, it's quite a traumatic thing and quite a crazy thing to be able to watch. The beauty of it is the chaos. And as we're going along, here's a great example. This was a long one that we were watching here. You can see how many thousands of wildebeest are in the back behind these vehicles, and they were coming out and then filtering across, and there were still thousands behind us coming through. But in the chaos, there's always one or two that may perish. And what was fascinating is, when we're trying to balance this out, it's hard to watch because not everyone's going to make it. But we calculated that in the 3 days we were watching crossings, and we saw 5, we calculated about 16 to 17,000 animals that we saw cross. And in that time, we saw 4 die. So if you think of the ratio of loss to gain, it far outweighs that. Now, obviously, there are moments that things can go wrong. And this is where tourism needs to be careful, is because what we do is we line up, and I've taken these photos to be kind, to show things beautifully. But there are moments where you can have 100+ vehicles watching a crossing. And that can be dangerous for the wildebeest, because if they come in too quickly and they block the exits, the wildebeest will try and get through at places that they can't. And especially if the water levels are high, you can have thousands of wildebeest die in one crossing just because they can't get out on the other side and end up drowning. So we have to balance this out and create it. And we'll talk about these conservation things as we go along. But it's an amazing thing to witness. The sound is amazing, the power is amazing. And I will show you now a video from our last trip.
The sun rises over the Serengeti plains, and our vehicles head towards the Mara River, where we hope to see the Great Migration at its most intense. Thousands of wildebeest and zebra gather at the river's edge, looking for a route across, knowing that there's crocodiles and all sorts of dangers, the threat of drowning, the confusion of the herd, moving back and forth, waiting for the moment that one is either brave enough or dumb enough to take the plunge. When the chaos begins, it's all about being present.
So the drama that plays out over the Serengeti is real. It is not something that is just beautiful. There's a lot of brutality that comes with it. Excuse me. And I think it's finding this balance and this beauty in the brutality that is so important, because without some death, there would be too much. And without the life, there would also be too much. There wouldn't be enough. And within this migration, the wildebeest are what we would call a keystone species. They are the backbone of this ecosystem of the Maasai Mara and the Serengeti and its surrounds, because they shape the landscape with their grazing. And by shaping the landscape with their grazing, each time they go through, they're eating grasses, which then in turn react by growing better grasses each time. Grasses are a very interesting thing that can seem quite boring, but without the correct grazing, without the correct utilization, they can fall backwards and start to lose quality, which means the next animals don't have. So you have to have this constant feeding to keep the utilization of the grass going, to make sure that it's green and it's beautiful and it's good for everyone. Because remember, it's not just the wildebeest that get to use this. The other thing that they do, that the wildebeest do, is they are a very essential part for predators. And we saw in that video the crocodile and the wildebeest. And this, I've shortened it quite dramatically in the video, but the moment we sat there, we sat for about 25 minutes watching this wildebeest fight. And she fought and she fought and she fought and she fought. And eventually the crocodile won. I mean, it was a dinosaur. It was huge. I mean, you saw it in the video. The thing must have been 18 foot long, probably weighs close on a metric ton. So it's about 2.2 thousand pounds. And has probably been on around and watched these crossings come past and fed off of them for almost 100 years. Now, crocodiles are extremely long-lived animals, and they're able, that crocodile can survive on one meal that big for a whole year. And what they do is they get their bounty. They start to catch and then they stash them under the rocks, because crocodiles don't have the ability to chew. So they can't chew their food. They actually have to do a death roll. So they grab on and then they spin round and round. And often it's more than one that'll be involved. So one can hold the carcass and the other one spins, or they're both spinning, which means you can dismember and take pieces off and then gulp them down. And they can slow their metabolism. So as it gets cooler, they just slow those areas, switch off their kidneys, switch off the liver, just store the fat and wait. And they don't need to move that much. It's a state called torpor. So crocodiles play a very important role in this ecosystem in taking the weak away, removing some of the young, removing the old ones, specifically the ones because they get pulled out of the rows by the current. They're not strong enough to swim, so they get pulled up to a point that a croc can isolate one and then pull it down. And this ensures that you have the strongest genetics moving on this migration the whole time. And every year it gets stronger. And every year when the babies drop, the strongest rate babies are dropped. And you have this back and forth. So crocodiles are a big part of this ecosystem. Lions, we all know. We found on this trip, we saw this lioness and two males feeding on a wildebeest they pulled down in the early hours of the morning. beautiful female. We watched the whole feeding, and then she moved off, and they had a whole bunch of cubs. And what you have in these environments are very big prides, because they have this bounty of food that comes through once a year that they can really feed off of. And they will time their births and try and time their births with the migration. So you might have them moving through, because if we go back to our picture of the route, they start coming up, they start coming up into the Maasai Mara around August, September, and then leave in October. So they try and time their birth as best they can. It depends on how the season is going, but they may start having babies around this August, September. Lions are able to have it all year round, but you always try and push it towards your bounty, where the bounty is. The lions down here in the calving area will try and have their babies around February, March, because they'll have the most amount of food, and they'll be able to feed those babies and have less pressure on the lactation, etc. Even when we were coming through central Serengeti here, because we spent a few days in the central Serengeti, we saw a cuddle puddle of 13 cubs, a lot of lion cubs. And it's just the perfect timing, because the wildebeest are making their way down now and will hit down here as these cubs are sort of getting to that meat feeding age, and they'll be able to have a bounty of food and be able to move through it. So lions are a big predator. We all know lions. We know how fierce they are, what they do. And we've always been told that they're the king of the jungle. In the Serengeti, this is a dubious, maybe not so true statement, because the pecking orders change depending on how things go. And the reason why I say that is because we have a predator called a spotted hyena, a very crazy looking creature that got a bad rap from the Lion King. The movie told us that these guys were evil and conniving and maybe also a little bit dim. But in contrast to the Lion King, these are probably the smartest land mammal on the planet behind us, if we can measure intelligence in certain ways. And the reason why they say this is because all the greater primates, the orangutans, chimpanzees, apes, or the great apes, and the gorillas, all three of them are able to problem solve a problem we give them on their own. For a reward, do this problem, go, and you'll get a reward. Fantastic. But as soon as we got to group problem solving and giving a few of them a problem to solve, we weren't able to see that group problem solving happen. And remember, that is measured against what we're testing them to, so that's skewed in some way. So understand that. But what they did with hyenas was they created a cage with a pulley system with 4 pulleys, and it required the specific weight of 3 hyenas, and they put 4 hyenas in. And inside the cage was meat. So they had to jump up and hang on these pulleys, figure out what the combination of the 3 was. The cage would lift, and in the case of all other primates and animals that were tested, everyone would drop, and the cage would drop, and they couldn't get to the food. These guys went, figured it out. The 4th one went in, grabbed the food, and moved it out. Then they all dropped and fed. Then they changed the combination to different individuals and did it again, and they figured out the combination, pulled the meat out, and again fed together. And they've got this incredible hierarchy where being the top predator in an area means that you can overpower everyone else. Now, typically in southern Africa, a clan of hyenas will be between 8 and 20 individuals, 20 being a really big clan of hyenas. The biggest clan of hyenas that was studied in the Serengeti was 156 animals. 156 animals. No pride of lions, even if you're 20 lions, is going to be able to stand up to 156 hyenas. And the reason why they're so adaptable and they're so able to do this is because they have one of the richest milks in the animal kingdom. Contains about 96% fat content within their milk, which means the mother, the alpha female, can feed her cubs, leave them for up to 7 days while she follows the herds, grabs another meal, and then comes back. So she can do these big migrations herself and tap into part of the migration for longer, especially around that central Serengeti area where they can just sort of spider web out. And they can be in competition with other hyenas, but they run away and there's enough food source for everyone to get by. So they're incredible creatures. And also, on top of it, their pride mentality or their group mentality, their clan mentality is very different. Hyenas are matriarchal. The females produce more testosterone than the males. They are bigger than the males, which is crazy. I mean, you just think about how big a hyena is. And that testosterone inside her actually has created and closed up her vagina, and her clitoris has become extended into a false phallus, a fake penis, which she will then use to mate and give birth through. And that's again a very interesting thought process. The males are smaller than the females, and in the pecking order, the highest ranking male is still outranked by the lowest ranking female. And all he's there for is sex. That's all they're there for. They get outcompeted at food and they move around, and that's how the genetics spread around. Whereas lions have a very different way of doing things. Their territories can move a little bit with the herds, but they can't overlap with other lions, which is a distinct thing. And the pride generally has its territory, and your pride males may have more than one pride that they cover. So the more males there are, the bigger the males, the stronger the males, the more prides they can cover, which means the more genetics they can get out. And generally in a fight between lions and hyenas, you need 4 hyenas to each lioness. As soon as a male's there, it almost makes it negate the whole thing. But if you have 150 hyenas, I think there's a clear winner that goes on. And those dynamics are so different. Then you get to some of the smaller cats. Your beautiful leopard, my favorite animal. Absolutely stunning. Not in as great numbers as what we see in southern Africa, because these are shy forest cats. And the Serengeti is big open plains. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It means that the density is not as large, and they may be confined more to the riverine areas than in those big open plains, because they can't hide and they'll be in competition with lions and hyenas. And lions and hyenas would try to kill them. So that doesn't seem like a very smart choice to be part of that. But they still play a role in the culling and bringing down the numbers of the calves of some of the smaller antelope grants, your Thompson's gazelle, zebra calves, etc. And these beautiful cats will move around and keep to their own little space along the way. We then have the opportunistic cheetah. The cheetah is the smallest and the weakest of all the big predators. And these guys can survive quite well in the Serengeti and Maasai Mara areas because they've got these big open plains. And again, because the numbers of lions are they're big, but they're located within areas, the cheetahs can skirt between that. And they've adopted a different way of hunting. So they hunt during the day when your lions, leopards, and hyenas all should normally be sleeping. That doesn't mean that they're always sleeping at that time, but cheetahs try to take advantage of the midday heat. That's why they have those black stripes under the eyes, like a football player in the lights, where they've got the black under their eyes to absorb the glare. Then they will use these big flat open plains to chase down their prey over distance and with great speed, reaching around 60-65 miles an hour at full sprint and then taking them down. But they're very at risk, because what ends up happening is If there's enough noise and there are lions close by, or hyenas close by, or a leopard close by, what happens is the cheetah is at such full speed, its metabolism is working so very hard to push through that it starts to overheat. Massive nostrils to get air in, big heart to pump, long legs to propel itself. But once it has reached about 400 to 500 yards in the sprint, it has to stop. If it doesn't, it will cook its brain because its temperature, body temperature, will go so high. So if it's made a kill and it's pulled something down, but it has attracted the attention of another bigger predator, it is very potentially going to be in a position that it could get killed because it doesn't have any more energy to be able to run away. It doesn't have the ability to get away from those things. So it has to play this game very carefully. But again, plays a massive role in our predator prey. The other thing we have are the African wild dogs or painted wolves. Now, these guys are madly cool creatures and unfortunately are very endangered. Them and cheetahs very endangered, but these guys specifically because they get out a lot. One pack of dogs can cover 1,000 square kilometers. I mean, huge, huge, huge areas that they'll go, and they chase their prey in East Africa down over long, long distances. And this means that they will automatically pull away the weak. So they chase the herd. The weak ones start to fall back after 1 or 2 miles, and these guys then start to grab them, grip the groins, rip them open, and the animal stops, and it's game on. Brilliant creatures to see. You've obviously got all your scavengers that go along with it, and it's an amazing thing to see all the vultures kettling above, moving up and up and up from kill to kill to kill to kill, because death is very much part of this show. And without it, you would just have too much. And they support so much. This death supports so much. The other thing that happens, which is quite cool down in the Serengeti, is with the herds come a lot of parasites, i.e. the tsetse fly. These guys like to bite, and they like to bite me specifically. So if you want to go on safari in East Africa, come on safari with me because I will keep all the tsetse flies from you by them beating me, so don't stress. But the lions get bitten too, and because of this discomfort of the bites, they're often up in trees. So you get these very unique sightings of lions in trees. So the migration really pushes a lot of boundaries. And going to see it is a beautiful thing. But you have to understand that this route is all along here. So we have what we call mobile camps. And the camps move from major area to major area. And often people go, and there's this misconception that I'm going to see the migration. So first of all, I'm going to see a crossing. It depends what time of year, and it depends where you go. We were right at the end of season, and everything was crossing back into Tanzania. So we were very lucky to see all the crossings we did because their migration is flexible. The timing is flexible. It's not like, okay, on the 6th of January, they'll be here. On the 14th of Feb, they're there. It moves with the rains. And if the rains are not falling, they're not moving. If the rains are falling in a different area, which climate change has changed a lot. And one of the biggest impacts we have to remember is we have raised the temperature by 5 degrees centigrade on average in the Serengeti in the last 20 years. It is a crazy amount. So our weather patterns are a little upside down, and the amount of crossings that are happening is not guaranteed. So when you go on these things, we're always looking to show you the herds, but it's not something that we can guarantee will show you the crossing. So through our winter season, so through June, July, August, September, October, we are in this area here. Our camps are up here. We will now start to pack up those camps, and we are going to move them down here to the southern part to be part of the calving session, which starts from February through March. And that will be our second green season safari for Kenya, Tanzania. So you'll see a different part of the migration. And this is a great way, and I hope this makes sense to you guys. This is why we call it a mobile camp. It doesn't move every week. It's a lot to move these camps. And the camps are beautiful. They're very simple, but really, really beautiful. This is the one in the migration camp, and it's really, really beautiful. It's actually been done up since I took these photos, and it looks really great, but it's also very simple. We're often sitting out around a fire, looking out over the bush in the evenings after a very long day of safari. Most days we're out early, so out 5:30, 6 a.m., and then we come back 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on what the day looks like. And then we sit around that fire and enjoy. And the tents are very simple. You have a beautiful bed that's very comfortable. You have your charging stations. There's electricity in there, but there is no hot water. You need to order your hot water, and you have a bucket shower. And these bucket showers sit inside here, and the guy hoists it up, and you hear him, and he goes, it's a talking shower, because he says, okay, your shower's ready. And then you open the taps and you have about 4 gallons of water to shower in, which is actually quite a lot of water. Lasts quite a lot longer than you would think. Very comfortable spaces, beautiful places, and we don't spend a lot of time in the camps, but they work really well. Most of our life is spent out in these vehicles. Beautifully new, kitted out nathab vehicles, and we spend our days searching for the best crossings, the best sightings, the best moments. We will take picnic lunches along with us. We will take breakfasts with us, and we set up in the middle of nowhere and just take in the surrounds. You really are put into the system. And most of the time we get some great sightings. Here we were with the lions over here feeding on the wildebeest, and it was a beautiful day out and a beautiful morning. Now, obviously, within the environment, there are conservation challenges. One of those is conflict with some of the local tribes. And there are 3 big local tribes that live around the area. The Maasai are world renowned, and most people associate them with the migration. And I love it. I actually picked up a few of the myths that go around what the Maasai think about the migration. And one of them is the spirit of survival. The Maasai story tells of a time when the wildebeest and the cattle were once the same animal. The Maasai believe that their ancestors had a choice between the two. Those who stayed with the cattle were blessed with livestock, but had to remain settled, while those who chose the wildebeest were granted freedom to roam endlessly, but at the cost of enduring constant danger and survival challenges. This myth reflects the Maasai respect for the migration as a representation of life's hardships and resilience. And the Maasai are a tribe that are heavily into cattle and goats. And they move around through these reserves, grazing their cattle, and often there's a conflict with the wildlife. For a long time, the Maasai used to, as a rite of passage into manhood, you had to, as a group, hunt a lion. And that was a very distressing thing because we were losing a lot of wildlife. Now we try and teach people that they should save these animals. And in fact, on Old Erekesi, which is owned by the Maasai, one of the places that we stop, we chat to one of the guys, and they have a community project where they're trying to upscale people's lives by saying, okay, instead of having 30 zebu cattle, you can have 10 nguni cattle, which are worth 4 times the amount, and then you have less grazing, less overgrazing, and you have this balance that goes on with it. But the stories they tell and the time we spend in the bush with them is quite special. The other tribe that is out there and very closely related to the Maasai are the Datogas, and they too have myths and fables around the migration. The one is the test of the Mara River, where the Tatoga myth often focuses on the perilous Mara River crossing. They say that the river spirits test the wildebeest each year, selecting the strongest to continue their journey northward. Those who perish are believed to join the spirits of the river, protecting future herds. And the Tatoga use the story as a way of teaching the endurance and humility and seeing the migration as a demonstration of natural order and survival. And these guys too have a idea of raising cattle and grazing their cattle. So again, that balance needs to be had where we maintain these beautiful cultures, but that it doesn't impact too badly on the areas. And they have beautiful jewelry. They're really quite a colorful tribe in that sense. And the last tribe down in the south of the Serengeti is a tribe called the Hadzabe. And they're a bushman, still a hunter-gatherer tribe that move through the bush looking to gain and gather honey, hunt animals, the small squirrels, bush babies, dik-diks, things like that, and live in harmony with everything. When I was with them on a trip, we actually saw them find a beehive, and they started hacking at the beehive and opened this beehive, started a fire with their stick, rubbing their sticks together. Fire started, smoked the bees out. The guys getting stung everywhere. But they say that you get stronger the more you get stung. I'm allergic, so I stood quite far back and just watched. But once they'd got the honey out, we got to taste this beautiful, pure honey that came out of it. And we also have to remember that when we're conserving something, we have to have the buy-in of people. So we can't also just shut things off. These guys rely on the Serengeti for their livelihood, to feed their family. They can't go work and things because the moment we take First Nations, these indigenous peoples, out of what they do, we have this prevalence of drugs and alcohol and all sorts of bad things that come along with it. And they may start using that as a way to then drive poaching and different things. And poaching is a huge problem around these areas because there is no fence to keep people out. There's no fence to keep the animals in. So snares are put out all over the place, and we need to manage that. We need to make these animals be worth more alive and part of the natural system than die. And then the last part to this whole thing is tourism is a great threat. So I'm going to play a skit from a BBC program, which I think explains it better and shows it better than I could. So here we go.
Cheetah are the fastest mammal. For their high-speed chases, they need open grasslands. But the backdrop to their lives has changed. With an estimated 69 million visitors to protected sites in Africa each year, parts of the wilderness are becoming overcrowded. There is pressure to get the best view of the kill. As the predators start to hunt, so do the cars. Wildlife experts studying the cheetahs recommend that there should be no more than 5 vehicles to each sighting. Over 70 cars now encircle this kill. Tourism has become essential to fund the protection of wild areas. Without the revenue that comes from it, this park and its cheetah would simply not be here. But having an assembly this size and this close comes at a cost. More of the cheetah's hunts fail, and more of their kills are abandoned. In areas of high tourism, research has shown that the survival of cubs is also greatly reduced. We are in danger of loving these cheetahs to death. It must surely be possible to respect the animal's need for space and at the same time enable human visitors to have a meaningful glimpse of the wild world. That is what must be achieved if cheetah are to have a future on the African plains.
So, like I say, it's a scary thing, but I think since this video was released, there's now a greater pressure on the guides in the parks that if they get caught going off road like that, like they were in that video, that they get a license suspended for 6 months. And this is being pushed to greater and greater effects. And we need to also manage what we do. So us as nathab, we try and avoid the crowds. And if we see something that's too crazy, we'll step back and let the animal have the space and go looking for something else, because there's so much else. There's so many great things to see. It's not just about seeing what everyone else is seeing. And on that note, I'm going to leave it there and I will take some questions. Thank you, Rob.
All right, Richard, thank you so much. Now, before we dive into the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's dive into some questions. So, are there rules in place right now that limit the number of vehicles surrounding a predator?
No number limited, but you are not allowed off the road. So you have to stay on the road. If the animal chooses to do something right next to the road, it chooses to be in the chaos. If it doesn't want to be there, it can walk 100, 200 yards off and be alone. And it seemed to me like a lot of people were adhering to that.
Good to hear. Thank you. So, if the grazers are migrating, but the lions have set territories, what do the lions eat when the grazers are not in their area?
That's a great question. Not all the grazers move. So there still will be things like buffalo, some zebra that won't migrate. There's still animals that are in those areas that will be in those areas year round. It is just the migration of wildebeest and a whole host of others that choose to do the route. It doesn't mean that the other areas are left barren. You can still go to Kenya in January, February, March when they're down in the south, and you'll still see lots of animals.
Gotcha. Thank you. So, have you ever seen any unique examples of hyenas using their intelligence in the wild outside of the experiment you mentioned?
Yes, not in the wild, but in a lodge. We had one of the lodges I worked in. We had a trash area which had a gate and a bolt lock, which we needed to put on because the hyenas would get in there. And I was sitting one night and watching, and a hyena walked up to the thing and started looking at the lock and looking at the lock. And then he took his mouth and lifted the latch of the bolt and pulled it back and then pulled the gate open. So he clearly watched somebody do it in order to understand that. I then went and chased it out, then took a piece of wire because they left it, somebody hadn't locked it properly, and I locked it with wire. and then stepped back, and 10 minutes later it came back and it chewed through the wire and then lifted the bolt lock again a second time. So highly intelligent creatures. When you think that they can figure something out that's totally man-made, to then figure that out is pretty special.
That is pretty amazing, Richard. So at the beginning of the talk, you talked about the wildebeest, and you were talking about all the different things it was made of. A couple of guests really wanted you to repeat that for them. So if you could do that, we'd appreciate it.
With pleasure. So it is the horns of a buffalo. I'm going to get a picture again. I don't know why I didn't put a nice photo in here of just a wildebeest, but horns of a buffalo, the goatee of a goat, the mane of a horse, the tail of a donkey, the sloping legs of a hyena, the stripes of a zebra, and there were no more brains left.
Gotcha. That's a wonderful description. Unfortunately, Richard, that's going to be the last question that we do have for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for any closing comments you have for us.
Thank you, Rob, for hosting tonight, and nathab for giving us the opportunity. And thank you to all of you for listening in. And I hope you got lots of value out of it. And I look forward to doing another one soon, hopefully sooner than soon. And we'll chat to you all. Thanks.
Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with nathab, give us a call at 800-543-8917 or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.